Welcome to Protea Conversations, the podcast where leadership in business and accounting isn't just discussed, it's explored. I'm your host, Zane Stevens, and thank you for joining me as we delve into the minds of some of the most influential leaders in the industry. Our journey is one of discovery, from unraveling the unique stories that shaped our guest careers to invaluable advice that fueled their success. We're here to provide you with simple, actionable advice to accelerate your career and personal growth. Whether you're a budding professional or a seasoned executive, these conversations are designed to offer insight and perspectives that resonate with everyone. So tune in, engage, and be inspired as we build better leaders together. Welcome to Protea Conversations.
Today, I'm joined by Mike Rowe, CEO of tensense.ai, a platform that turns your organization's real-time experiences into decision signals. After a 28-year policing career and years coaching CEOs, Mike built a tool that spots issues before the metrics do. We'll unpack sense-making, how finance leaders can use it alongside their financial dashboards to really learn what's going on in their business. Mike, thanks for coming on Protea Conversations.
Well, hi, Zane. Very pleased to be with you. Thank you for asking me.
I feel like this is going to be a super insightful episode for, accounting firm leaders to get a better sense of what leadership really means, how managing people is important, and how they can use people's opinions and their thoughts and feelings to really drive your business forward. Let's talk about the early career. I have definitely met some people that have been in the police force before, but definitely none of them that are from the UK in the police force. So just a little sense of what that early career looked like, how you got into it. Just, teach me as if I not know what's going on, which I really don't. So it'll be interesting to sort of hear what that early career looked like.
Sure. Well, I guess I think I've had 3 careers, really. The first one was very short. That was a year in a bank. I disliked that so much that I remember coming home one day, had another day in the bank, and my father was a police officer. And I said, I can't stand this being in a bank. Incidentally, the lesson there is pay more attention at school and then you get better choices. But anyway, I said to him, I can't stand this. And he said, well, we're recruiting at the moment. And I said, well, get me a form. And the rest, as they say, is the next thing is I found myself at police training college. And yeah, as you said in the preamble, I mean, just short of 30 years, I served in the same force. There are 43 forces in the United Kingdom. Well, yeah, in the UK. And I was in a force called Avon and Somerset, which had a major city called Bristol. Those that don't know the UK, and Bristol is one of the largest cities in the UK. And so that was my first career, and still probably is the career that I think defines me, although for the last near 15 years, I've been the CEO of Tensense. But going back to the service, I mean, it was, the phrase best of times, worst of times. I think it was the best of times up until the last 7 years. And the last 7 years was when I was the commander of the city of Bristol. I say best of times, worst of times. We are, our careers and our leadership is defined by the kind of experiences we have and the insights we gain. And I mean, it is 7 years that I wouldn't have changed anything for. But I think most of our life, we learn from the things that we messed up, the things that we get wrong, or the circumstances that we find ourselves in. And, having spent most of my career as a detective, I suddenly found myself as a commander. And then at a time when drugs hit Bristol in a big way, and I can share a bit more about that if that's of interest. But yeah, so that 7 years really did define my leadership, if that makes sense. And I took much of that then into what was then the next phase of my professional career with Tensense.
Fascinating. I'd like you to expand on that a little bit, because there's something there that I think we're all missing. But, 7 years as a commander, it's a long time. It's obviously a great honor. How did that process come along? Why do you feel like it was potentially just not your favorite, or maybe a little tiring?
It was certainly tiring, but I mean, I loved it. It was a huge privilege. And so we're talking here about 1999, and the chief constable of the day asked me if I would go and command Bristol. At that stage, it was the centre of Bristol. And the first thing that happened is we went through a huge bit of change as we restructured the force to something they called geographic policing. And I'm sure there's a similar thing in the US and elsewhere in the world, but this was about focusing the policing service in small localities where you would empower the local police inspector, if you like, to deliver the service. So that was a big bit of change. So I guess in terms of, leadership, until you find yourself in it, no one really tells you. Plenty of books written about it, but how do you actually lead and manage change in an organization? But then what happened is, I'll never ever forget it. One of my local bobbies, police officers, came up to me. This is about 2000. Said, "Boss, something's happening on the streets. Something is happening on the streets." And I said, "Well, go tell me more." And essentially what had happened was, we were being inundated with crack cocaine, and it had been in small pockets elsewhere around the country, but this was now really affecting us. And so, but basically what was happening is that we were being subjected to what they call swallowers. So on every Air Jamaica flight, I'm not just picking on Jamaica, but it was Jamaica, there would be about 30 swallowers on a flight to Heathrow. Now, I don't know whether your listeners can get their head around that, but it's a humanitarian disaster in some ways. So this is, people would package up the cocaine, they would wrap it into small, tiny balls, they would ingest it, swallow it, and then get on a flight, get to Heathrow. The customs and opportunities for checking this was not as good in 2000 as it probably is now. They would get through custom. We used to describe the problem as that wide, which was the getting through customs. Get on the M4, our motorway. An hour and a half later, you're in Bristol. Wait for nature to run its course, and suddenly you've got crack cocaine on the streets. And so it generated chaos. And if you can imagine that a lot of people had roughly a £300 a day habit. Now, if you think about, in the world of accountants, you're good at maths, so you can work that out. So how much crime you'd have to commit to get £300 worth of disposable cash. So basically the world went mad. So we had to deal with that. And, in terms of lessons learnt, well, there's a couple of things there about. Yeah, a couple of things, really. One is that you can't do it all yourself. There's a little phrase, you have to do it yourself, you can't do it alone. And that is so true of problems that we faced as a service. We actually needed to go back and partner with the Jamaica police. So we wouldn't have been able to solve the problem without them. We had to partner with the local authority. We actually had to recruit more probation officers. I don't know if that translates or elsewhere around. So people that could support people who had chaotic drug life cycles, people who had been in prison and then came out who needed support. So it was not just about enforcement. It was about a much more holistic strategy to solve this problem, if that makes sense. And without boring your listeners, I mean, we sort of did get that to a much more contained place, but it had its problems. Government just couldn't understand why our crime was going through the roof. And if a claim to fame, not dinner party chat, is that the Home Secretary at that time in our country wanted me sacked. He couldn't understand why we were presiding over this kind of massive increase in crime. And no matter how much you kind of explained it to them, they kind of didn't get it. But anyway, we got through it. And then I was asked if I would amalgamate Bristol. And so I ended up bringing 3 big bits of the business together. And for the last few years of my service, ran the whole thing.
Incredible story. I mean, crime, poverty, drugs, they tend to push, crime, poverty, and drugs even higher, which is, part of the cycle. And I do like that initiative, having to go back to Jamaica, go to the source, let's police it there before people get on the planes, right? Because once they're on, that's a lot of people getting off one airline, you trying to check for all of that. And I mean, I don't think people understand how dangerous being a swallower is, because one, it shouldn't be going through your body like that. But also if the bag breaks, you're effectively dead on the spot because it's such an overdose that can hit your body.
Yeah. But it's also about, you start to learn the politics with a small p about these things. And, government is so short term. Yet many of these, there are intractable problems that need multi-agency approach and needs us to be brave and hold the line and sometimes push back on the rhetoric, even if it's not in our own personal interests. And, and we did that. And in fact, after that, I always remember the chief rang me. He said, "My career is behind me. Yours is still ahead of you. But I think we should collaborate with an investigative journalist who would like to do a piece on the importance or not importance of crime stats that drive unintended behaviors. So in our country, the Treasury, the Home Office will drive certain behaviors because politically that is what they want to see.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, I held the line for a long time on setting up a vehicle crime squad. Okay, you can imagine this was, have a vehicle crime squad to try and reduce what was a volume crime. But I didn't have the resources.
Mm-hmm.
And what I did want to do is to take police officers out of schools. Because in my view, police officers working in schools was a long-term investment, not only in the police-public relationship, but as an intelligence gathering, important barometer of what's happening in society. I just use that as an example. And whether we're in policing or whatever other sector we might be, there are at times these moral dilemmas between what you instinctively know is right and should be done, and the pressure that we get from elsewhere to do things which may be expedient or may serve someone else's agenda.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Talk to me about the change management side of this, because, coming in and there's a new way of policing and then an amalgamation, change management is one of the hardest things to deal with in life, I would say. I mean, especially as an accountant, we deal with people that absolutely hate change all the time, and trying to get change management right sometimes feels like a near impossibility. What did you learn through that process of coming in and having to make what is significant changes in the way you're policing, and how do you get your teams on board with this, this significant change in the way that they've all been grown up in the force a certain way, and now they have to police a very, very different way?
Well, I mean, this is still an issue now, isn't it? Across the globe, everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
There's a little phrase, life is lived forward and understood backwards. I think it's a Scandinavian philosopher. And I think that's what's happened to me, really. I look back now and I can see all the things that I got wrong or didn't, because having had the privilege of the last 15 years coaching chief execs and entrepreneurs and working with a lot of organizations, in some ways our diagnostic, Tensense, was built to help organizations deal with this because, the chief scientist, Dr. Mike Carter, is a behavioral change expert. So, but park that to maybe a bit later in the conversation. The truth is that when I was going through that, I didn't know what we were doing. I mean, if I'd had tensense and I used an early version of it when we amalgamated, but if I'd had the more sophisticated data that we can help organizations with now, I would at least have had a clue how to reduce some of the ambiguity and know where to go. There's two things I think I would say that I would do differently now. One is around core values. So you will know this. Many of your listeners will know this. We bang on about the importance of values in organizations. We have them written on posters, but how many organizations can truly say that they are values led? Very few. If I once went to an organization, I was in the reception waiting. I looked up at the wall and I could see there was what was clearly the updated list of values alongside the old list of values. And I said to the receptionist, what's it? Well, she said, oh yeah, we forgot to take that one down. Well, that makes the point. And so for me, I've learned so much working with Mike Carter, but one of the things, I mean, I'm going to quote him twice now in answering your question. He did a lot of research and ran a case study on an energy company called AES. I think they're called AES. And they built their whole success just on three core values. I think fun, fairness, and responsibility. But they truly embedded the values as a way of running the business. In near 28 years in the service, I don't ever remember sitting around an executive table or the chief officer group meeting and going, right, what do our values say about this decision we're about to make? And I think even now in a small little company and working with organizations, I think that is a very powerful inflection moment. The moment you start to go, do you know what? Yeah, we missed a trick there, or we fell short of living that value. And so I think for me, change and really embedding the values is important. And then, Mike always says, and I steal this all the time, there are three priorities for leaders when going through change. And people will know this. You go, what's number one? People, it's probably communication, isn't it? Yeah. What's number two? Communication. Number three, communication. And of course, when you've done all that, you haven't done enough. And so I think that is crucial. And often leaders go, well, what have I got to say? What can I say to them? I don't know the answer to that. Well, if you don't know, they'll make it up and they'll fill the vacuum. So there is something about, as I look back, that's probably, and we did a pretty successful amalgamation, but we were making it up as we went along.
Yeah, it's such a tough one. And, I love the point on communication and the void that you mentioned there, because it really is true. If somebody asks you something about a change and you don't have a response to them, they will just make it up because they need to fill that answer for themselves, right? What I've learned, when you don't fill the gap, they're not going to come up with a positive response. Like, that's not happening, right? If you don't bring the right answer or any answer, they're just going to make up a bad answer. That's just the natural fear. Like, I'm scared of this happening, so it's got to be the worst case scenario if they're not giving me the answer in the first place.
Yeah. And you made the point earlier in this conversation, people don't like change. People go, oh, if only we just need to do business as usual. Well, we'll be dead. You'll be dead. And so it was in the service, which is why we tried to create a compelling vision. I mean, people might have laughed, but I said, we're going to make Bristol the safest city in the world. And people would laugh. And I go, okay, then name me a safer one. And people go, I don't know, Toronto. And of course, I didn't have to provide the stats. I said, look, this is an aspiration. There'll be some metrics. But, we are working for the X thousands of people that live in this city. This is our role. This is our role. This is our responsibility. So I think that's another thing is you create that compelling vision. I got a very simple model for leadership, which is leaders set the purpose and direction. They align people around it. They motivate people, and they create a culture of leadership, because we can't do it alone. We need people to do it while we're asleep. So that's my philosophy.
No, I love that. Creating a compelling vision, something that everybody believes in and wants to aim for, is sort of what unifies people, right? And then you have those values that drive you towards that vision and give you the roadmap on how are we going to achieve that vision. And it doesn't matter what you're doing. You're building an accounting firm, you're running a multi-billion-dollar business, or you're running a police force. Having that good vision, having those values in place, they will drive you towards your ultimate outcome. Doesn't mean it's going to be perfect along the way, but at least gives you, there's the target, here's the roadmap, now let's go execute.
Yeah, 100%.
So you touched on it. After that, you had your third career. So we went from bank to the police to coaching leaders, and obviously great experience running one of the biggest cities in the UK through one of the most challenging times in their history. A lot of great leadership advice, a lot of lessons learned. How did we go about this change from 28 years in the police force through to becoming this coach for leaders?
It happened a bit by chance, really. I mean, most of your listeners will not be familiar with cricket. I'm pretty sure they won't understand what cricket is. You get it.
For sure.
You get it.
Oh, yeah. I love cricket, played cricket, and also tore my MCL playing cricket, which ended my careers.
I watched your team win the Test Championship at Lord's this year.
Oh, wow.
Throughout my career, I have never let my professional life get in the way of my sporting life, which is what flummoxed me at school, really. If someone had said, play less sport and focus more on your exams. But sport's been a very key part, and I have been long associated with the cricket club in my hometown, which is a place called Bath. And it was there that I met a guy who had set up the company that I'm now the CEO of. Originally was called Foot Down. And there is probably an important little segue here, is that Foot Down was a leadership and mentoring company. And in 2004, I was still in Bristol, but I met this guy, and he had set up the first mentoring group, and he persuaded me. Well, I said, okay, so what's all that about then? And he said, I always remember what he said. He said, well, a bunch of leaders and entrepreneurs come together once a month to talk about leadership. And for me, it became the first time in my career that I had somewhere I could go and share the things that really mattered to me that I couldn't talk about elsewhere. It was a safe environment, and I became member number 7 in this group. And of the rest is history. But what happened was that we were sitting in this group, and one day, one of the guys was saying, look, wouldn't it be great if we could think of a business that could make a lot of money but save the planet? That was the conversation. And anyway, without boring you with the detail, one of the members put a bit of money in and a business grew. And the founder went off to be the CEO of this company, but he was left with, what am I going to do about foot down? So this was me. I had a job. I still had a couple of years before I could retire from the police service. But he was saying, Mike, would you come and run what was then Foot Down? So that was a leadership and mentoring company. So the group were really super, super helpful. And I decided to take the risk, if it was a risk, and jump into this kind of whole new world of the private sector. And again, without boring you in the interest of time, for the first few years, we were building mentoring groups, and we had about 12 across the UK. And I understood that, I understood because I've been in the group and still was now leading what was then the Bar 15. But as I said earlier, we'd always had this diagnostic, and I had used it when I amalgamated Bristol, and we started using it with our members. And just for the benefit of your listeners, at that stage, it was a card sort, but this will help people understand how we moved from there to where we are now. So if you can imagine, we had about 360 clue cards in a box, a great big board. And the board was like a strategy board, organizational strategy, leadership, blah, blah, blah. And the senior executive teams, would play these cards. And essentially the clue would say, we don't do this very well, whatever the subject was. Could be, we don't trust each other, or we have no clear vision. And a whole bunch. And people would, if they thought it was true, they'd throw them on the board. And then we'd sort out all these cards. And the idea was that we would identify the top 3 issues facing this executive team. And for a few years, we had a bit of fun doing that. But what happened was we found that we were becoming a consultancy, because people would then ask us to go fix their problems. And so that's what we did. And the passion was always about, how can you inspire leaders and organizations to be the best they can be? We just happened to use this diagnostic to do it. Anyway, fast forward, I reconnected with a guy called Dr. Mike Carter, who I mentioned already, and Mike came in and became the chief scientist. And we just took it from that to basically where it is today. And I can go into a bit more detail if that's appropriate, but essentially we built a performance warning system for organizations. In some ways, the thing I wish I'd had when I needed it most, with 1,500 people and complexity and chaos around me. But I guess that's what we did. We took a lot of our own experience, and particularly Mike's experience, and the fact that he is a behavioral scientist, and built what we've built and what we use with organizations today. That's how it happened. So I went from cop being the chief exec of a tech company, and no one saw that coming.
Yeah, funny how life happens. But talk to me about that early stage. It's you went from basically the executive team's sentiment, where, the way I sort of see it now is more of a pulse of your whole company. And that feels like it's a fairly massive mindset change where, it's the opinion of few to the truth of many. And I would say that would be a great move. But as a consulting, were you running into that issue where you think that these are the 3 big issues, and you'd get in there and start talking to the people on the ground and realize maybe those aren't the right issues?
I'm just going to write that down, because that was slightly brilliant. I think you just said the opinion of the few to the truth of the many. Did you say to the truth of the many? Something like that.
Yep, the truth of the many.
That is brilliant. And that actually is kind of, it's like if you're a consultancy, and often executive teams perch, they take time out. And that's another thing that I always did. Sometimes people would take the mickey out of me. Oh, you're always taking your team away. You have to sometimes work on it, not in it. And that the only way that you really build trust and engagement and loyalty and all that good stuff and live the values is by investing time in having the conversations that are tricky. And that means, for me, what I have learned over the years is leaders need to be both curious and prepared to be vulnerable. And I don't mean vulnerability is, I don't know what I'm doing. Vulnerability is, okay, Zane, that's an interesting way of looking at it. I hadn't thought about it like that. Tell me a bit more. And then being prepared to shift course if that's what's required. So going back to your question, people will often get a senior team together, and you might have it facilitated, and you might ask yourself the question, well, what's the biggest issues facing us? And as you've just said, the opinion of the few would be, well, we need to do A, B, and C. So back then we had all these clues which would allow you to reduce the equivocality. But then over time, we got rid of the cards and we made it a data-driven diagnostic, all designed then to avoid just the opinion of the few, but to tap into what is the sentiment across the business, because it is The answers lie in those dark, spooky little places that you can't always get to. And even if you're an organization of 50 people, I would contest that even the managing partner doesn't always know what 50 people think, because often we're too busy to ask them. We might ask them, Zane, you all right? Yeah, I'm all right. Right, move on. So this notion of perching or having a pulse regularly to tap into what people know is going on is very important. And there is so often a divergence between what we as the executive team think is happening and what the rest of the world think is happening, particularly when you break it down to a function, to a geography, to hierarchy. And that's the piece that we get excited about. We just so happen that we do it as a software solution.
Yeah, so talk to me about how that sort of evolved into a software solution. In the current world, it's like, oh, that makes totally sense. Let's do it online. But I'm sure it's not that easy. And I know there's a lot of intelligence behind it. And you have a scientist on board. But how did that develop? How did you get to the point where it is the tool that is today?
Well, firstly, just whisper this, don't share this with all your listeners, but there was a very messy period when there is something called the founder's trap. And so I spent quite a lot of my time managing tension between the founder of the business, who took a particular view about what this diagnostic should be, because he was a software guy, and the scientist who knew what he was talking about. And so there was a lot of inherent tension. But of course, at the end of the day, that's a story for another day, Mike had to win because there was no such thing as, you ask a question that one clue will reveal a particular answer. There is not enough power of software in the world to create that kind of redactive model. So we had quite a lot of, in the early days, big tension. But eventually, to answer your question, I said, Mike is an expert in a science called organizational sense making. Sense making has been around since the late 60s. And I'll ask people, have you ever heard of sense making? And most people will go, no. And that's fair enough. Yep. It was developed by a guy called Carl Weick, who not long ago died in the States. But what's important is what it means. And so sense making at its core is how we as humans pick up the cues and signals from around us every day. And therefore how we can create meaning so that we can understand what's going on, so we can make decisions. And Mike has both taught and researched on sense making and in universities in Bath for many years. And so when we were thinking about what our place in the world was, we had this original diagnostic, but the leaders that we were working with, the CEOs and the entrepreneurs, were becoming increasingly frustrated by the big four. Now, I'm not here dissing McKinsey's or the Boston Consulting Group. People don't get sacked for hiring them if you can afford them. But a lot of CEOs are going, the world's changing. It's very expensive. And, we had a particular story where the HRD of a company in the UK rang me and said, we have got the Boston Consulting Group report. They are doing due diligence on a potential merger between us and a company in New York, and we are underwhelmed. And they sent the report down, and Mike looked at it and said, well, there's some nuggets in there if you can find it. Anyway, long story cut short, we flew up to Scotland where they were based, and they deployed tensense in an afternoon. And they went, oh my God, we are never going to merge with them. Now, admittedly, we'd only deployed it to one half of the deal, but the point was made. And we flew back and we realized at that moment that we could disrupt the consulting market, and that what we thought we had, which would be super useful for organizations generally, also had applicability to consultancies who were trying to help clients, particularly with that discovery phase, particularly with what is the story here? Before we go on and spend money on this kind of intervention or hire that person, whatever it might be, what is really going on in this business? And so what Mike did is he brought utility to sense making by building the diagnostic. And I think the other bit that might be interesting to listeners, which is super interesting to me, is the research that has gone on into the science of sense making. And people will be very familiar with the examples I'm about to quote, but you might not know it's about sense making. The Challenger disaster. So people knew that these little rings at a certain temperature were vulnerable. Yet that spacecraft took off. So what is it? Willful blindness. Margaret Heffernan, great author. She wrote a book called Willful Blindness. Take a look. It is so powerful. And Challenger, Bhopal, air crashes, and Mike and colleagues, their contribution was the shooting of the Brazilian electrician on our underground back in 2007. What they did around this research is they didn't play the blame game. They would deconstruct these incidents and then reconstruct them to extract the learnings. And you might say, well, what's that got to do with business? Well, on the one hand, hopefully people in business don't die, but particularly in high reliability organizations, they can, but businesses die. And so the premise here is that as leaders and as organizations, we have to sometimes perch, even if it's for a second, when we're in the control room of a major terrorist incident where we have issued an instruction that says stop him, and the counter-terrorism firearms officers interpret that as, oh, we need to shoot him. And then come back to the things you and I are more familiar with, which is more monthly meetings with, or hopefully things don't happen in that critical time period. It's how often do we just sometimes stop and go, okay, let's just check in here. What are we missing? In terms of our strategy or our tactics, et cetera, et cetera. So the science and the research, I think, is really interesting. And that's what's underpinned our thinking and our work with organizations as we've sought to introduce tensense to leaders who are particularly curious. Does that make sense? I don't know if I probably may have got off a bit of piece there, Zane, but that's...
There's a lot of detail in there, but I follow it. It's one of those situations where, especially as accountants, there's a lot of, why do we do this? Oh, because we did it last year, type response to everything. I don't think as an industry, we take enough time to sit down and go, is this still working? We're evolving on a daily basis. All these processes we have put in place, something that people care about, has it any effect on their lives, or is it having a negative effect on their lives? Which, in that case, we should strip it away, replace it, change it. And I think what people struggle as leaders is going, in my mind, that feels like a great idea, but do the people that it's affecting actually appreciate it? Or even in some cases, even know that it exists? Because a lot of time, I think that's the bigger gap. It's like, oh, we've got this great program. And then you ask the team, like, hey, how many of you know about this program? And one person raises their hand. It's like, oh, fantastic program. Nobody knew about it. It's not adding any value to your business. And having an ability to check the pulse of your business on a regular basis, I think makes a big difference in being able to have good, constructive conversations at a leadership team so that you're not focused on the things that you're thinking are the problems, but really getting down into what are the real problems that everybody else is feeling.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, I guess the reason why I'm on this podcast with you is simply because I have been, in the last 18 months, part of a community of accountants. Light aside, bit of humor. I mean, I failed my maths O-level twice. Me and accountants and numbers. But that's okay, because what I've done is I've met a lot of really great people. It doesn't matter whether you're accountants, lawyers, or working in whatever sector. It's where people are trying to deliver a service with people and share the values and et cetera, et cetera. Then we think we have a role to play. But to your point, we were looking for, if you remember, I said we had 360 clue cards. We then built it on an app and kind of developed it. We were then looking for what's the fewest number of questions you could ask across an organization that would give you the biggest insight. Forget engagement surveys, not dissing them, but we're not that. Forget customer. Yeah. This is, how do you at speed tap into what people know is, what's the story here? What do I do next? And we came up with 16, and a university of Bath in the UK helped us do that. So that's what I think is pretty incredible, is that Mike and colleagues, 16, and for over 8 years, whenever anybody completes it, and you then show them their results, they go, oh my God, yeah, that's us. What we're about doing is finding the gaps. Where are the opportunities for performance improvement? But I would say this, leadership, which is the sort of theme of many of your podcasts, it's a contact sport. We don't replace that. We augment it. We want the data to give leaders a bit of a lift, a bit of a step up, a kind of sense of, where do I put my scarce resources? Where do I put my effort? And the most exciting thing for us was that working with quite a big accountancy firm in the UK, and they've now been with us for 4 years, into their 4th year. their CTO said, Tencent's data now helps us predict our profitability in 2 years' time. If you think about that even if that's only half true, that is exactly where we want to get, because what you were talking about a minute ago was so much I think accountants are like us. You tell stories, but you tell it with your numbers. But unfortunately, so much data is rear view mirror. It's happened. That's okay. We need to learn from that. But what we're trying to do is allow the leader and the partner group to have that kind of forward looking, what's coming down the track? Where are the threats and opportunities to this business?
Yeah, giving people some hotspots where they really need to focus in on is critical, right? Because there is a lot going on in business. As you grow, you mentioned there's like 50 people. Like, with 50 people, there's a lot of nooks and crannies where problems can sort of grow, right? And thinking about like if you take a baking tin and you get a round one, it's pretty easy to clean and you can get in all the corners, no problem. Now all of a sudden you've got the flower shaped one that has all the different little edges. It becomes harder to clean, and that's sort of what a business is. When it's small, it's round and easy, and you can talk to everybody and have big long conversations, ask them all the questions. But as you get bigger, those corners get far away. There's more places things can hide and more feelings and opinions, right? And I think that's the hardest part about being a leader is people's feelings and opinions on things that happen. And a lot of the time, those feelings and opinions might not even necessarily be true, but it's their truth. So who cares what the truth is? As long as it's their truth, it is the truth. And I think especially for numbers people like accountants, that can be a really hard concept to sort of work with, because they can't comprehend like 1 + 1 is 2. But that person telling me 1 + 1 is 3, and like 100% agree it's wrong, but it's their version of the truth. So you have to work with their version of the truth to make the adjustments. And having tools that identify those people or areas or, locations or subset within the company where there might be these hotspots where I know part of it talks about, how much transparency is in the company, how much of sharing information there is. And you can, as a leader, feel like you share everything. You share more than you should. But if your team feels like they're not getting any information, then it doesn't matter what you think you're sharing. It matters what they think. And they think you're not being transparent enough. Well, then you're going to have to make the adjustments or understand your business is going to start heading the wrong direction.
Yeah. It's why I would give, I don't know if I'm allowed to do this, I'd give a shout out to Paul Dixon, is the managing partner at Armstrong Watson. And Paul just shares the results every month with his board out. That takes some courage, because you can't go, well, I'm not going to share it this month because I didn't quite like what it showed. And so that generates the conversation. They are an organization that's made up of, quite a lot of acquisitions. So it allows them to check and test back where we started. How do you manage that change? How do you check in? So, he is one of those people who I would consider, as a curious leader and works with the data, which is why he's had people complete it regularly for so long.
Yeah, no, it's a great example. Mike, as you've worked with all these leaders over the last 15 years, is there I want you to generalize. I know that it can be hard, but is there like a big blind spot that a lot of leaders have that you sort of think, like, if they're listening to this right now, be like, this is an area you probably should put some additional attention on because we see leaders fall short here all the time?
I mean, I guess over now what is nearly 20 years of coaching CEOs, you experience those that are very successful in spite of their style or the way they operate. You just have to accept that. It's a fact of life.
Yep.
Would you want to work in those companies? Maybe not. The rewards might be great, but and then there are those that work really hard on allowing their people to flourish and build in a business of purpose and with core values. But I think I'd probably say two things in answer to your question. The first is that when I left the service, I went on a coaching course to qualify as a coach, because that's what I was going to have to do. I was going to have to coach all these CEOs and leaders. So we're talking nearly 20 years ago. Transformational. Now, I'm not saying that organizations need to turn everybody into coaches, but what I am saying is that having the ability to have coaching type conversations with your people and your teams is not for the faint-hearted and will yield you X result. What do I mean by that? Actually being able to listen better. So one of the mistakes I think I made probably for years was, I'm a very open leader. My door's always open. People will come in. You'd spend a few seconds listening to them and you'd think you'd immediately know what they wanted. And so you'd be pretty keen to help them with the answer. How many people must have left my office thinking, well, that's not what I went in for. And he's given me, I'm exaggerating to make a point. Whereas we know that coaching is about helping raise people's awareness so they can take responsibility for their actions. And so if in an organization, we've got a whole bunch of people who are now taking responsible initiative, and we as leaders are supporting them, but asking them great questions, because I do believe great leaders ask great questions of themselves and others. And that's the bit that I never had. I wish I'd done that much, much earlier. It would have changed, but not massively, because I think intuitively through sport, coaching was quite important, but I didn't have the tools. To say things like, oh, that's interesting, Zane, tell me more, and really mean it, because I think you might have an answer to something that I don't know the answer for. The second thing I'll share with you, and this comes out of the mouths of babes. So my grandson is now 13, but he was 11 at the time. And we were walking around here, and we were chatting about his school class prefect. And this was transformational for me. And he said, he said, so-and-so is going to be the class prefect and he shouldn't be the class, whatever, I said, well, would he? I said, so what do you think what's the top 3 characteristics of the class leader? And he didn't have to think about it too much, but what he told me has stayed with me. And for me is the kind of test. One, he said teamwork. Second, he said good ideas. And I think that is important. I think leaders have to have good ideas because you can't rely on everybody for it. The third thing, and this was the difference, he said kindness. And that's the bit that I think is missing. That so many, and I don't think it costs much. And so just out of that 11-year-old's mouth was that bit I went, oh my God, we can still fire people with kindness. We can hold them to account with kindness. And it's not about not doing what needs to be done. So that's the bit that I think, Woody's given me the 3 characteristics that I think good leaders should have.
Well, I can tell you I absolutely love your grandson because I think kindness is incredible and it doesn't cost much. It actually benefits us all. It helps the people receiving it, and I promise you it helps you as well. But I do want to go back to the coaching side of it because I think that is a critical point for everybody to take. And this is something that I have to work on a lot, and I have to stop myself, and I'm using different tools to make sure that I am following through with my goal to be a better coach. I am a problem solver. I like to solve problems. So I have to teach myself to stop having conversation and stop listening to solve the problem, and rather listen to ask the next question to allow my team to solve the problem themselves. There's a couple of reasons behind that. One, I might not necessarily be there all the time. So I can't just be solving every problem that comes up. Like, it has to be a team effort. Like, if you want to be a team player, you got to get different people involved. Go back to the cricket analogy. Hey, I could be out first ball. So what good is it me now? I'm not solving this run chase because I'm out. Now somebody else has to be able to step up and solve this problem for us. The other part of it is when people solve their own problems, or at least get a certain length into solving the problem, they feel way more bought into that solution than if I just give them an answer. Right? They feel like they're part of the process. It's, they're part of their idea. And because we've had good, open conversations about it, they feel invested and they'll run forward with just a little bit more speed than it's like, hey, boss man said I need to do this again. And hey, I don't know if it's going to work. I'm not sure if he was listening to me, but he said we do it. So here we go. And that whole mindset shift as a leader, and especially as the generations of my team members change, I need to understand that some people, they want to solve their problems. They want to be part of the process. And being able to coach people to solve their own problems empowers your team, builds trust, builds strength, and builds a better organization.
Well, you're preaching to the choir. I mean, but it's hard to do because there's a little phrase. Some of us are listening. Some of us are waiting to speak. And if you imagine, any boardroom or executive meeting, it's kind of what happens. And I'll bring this all the way back to sense making if we've still got a few minutes. And Mike used to talk about this. It's like system 1 thinking, system 2 thinking. There were only 4 things that man, the generic term, needed to know, right? Way back. What to eat, who to have sex with, who to fight, and who to run away from. And those things used to take seconds. And there was only one of those that took a little bit longer. and that was what to eat because of poison berries. Now, in some ways, the world has not changed. That it's that kind of intuitive, visceral reaction. So in a board meeting, we get system 2 playing out at the end of the meeting. We get a nice agenda, we get nice tabulated minutes, and they're circulated, and everybody would go, oh, okay, yeah. Now, does that bear any resemblance to actually what happened in the meeting? No. Because what happened in the meeting was I'm in there with my bid for some budget. I'm against Zane, who's running a different bit of the business. And actually Zane might be the heir apparent to be CEO. So what can I do to undermine him? Because, and I'm exaggerating to make a point, but it's that kind of visceral reaction. So that's what we as the CEO or the chair of the group, we need to recognize that's what's going on. It's sense making in action. And so I think back to your point, being able to engage in coaching type conversations with people is far more powerful. But of course, it's not going to work for the narcissistic leader who, where hubris is at stake. They are not going to be following this. Yep. But for those of us that want to deploy more kindness because we think that actually it's people that will make us successful, to your point, coaching allows them to take responsibility and ownership. And what I've learned over the years, the hard way, is I do a little thing, out of 10. Just a little numbers out of 10, so I could ask you here if I'm coaching anybody, I might say, well, Zane, out of 10, how'd you feel? 10, the best I can be. You give me a number. That's the agenda for our conversation. But if we have a conversation about a piece of work and I say to you, Zane, just give me a score out of 10. To what extent have you understood what we've been talking about? 10, I completely get it. You give me a 7 and we're going to go around it again. And even if you give me a 9 and then I go, to what extent are you committed to doing this? You give me a 7, we're going to go around it again. Because what tends to happen is people tell leaders what they want to hear. You all right with this, Zane? Yeah, I'm fine with that, boss. I'm fine with that. And they go away and go, I haven't got a clue what he wants. And so we waste so much time. And that's why I just think the coaching bit in the toolbox could be so vital, and clearly you get. But there's so much more in the world we can do.
Yeah, my 2 big takeaways is, we got to all instill a coaching mindset into ourselves and our organizations. And number 2, we all just got to be a little kinder, and the world will be a better place.
Well, yeah, and I'm just, apologies for this, but whenever we show the tensense results, in some ways, all you need to do is go, what do you think? Because we don't need to be going, there's your results, go do that. We want the leadership team to look at it and go, oh my God, or who do we go to thank?
Yeah, no, fantastic. Mike, I appreciate that. I've learned so much in this conversation, but I do have one important question for you that I think everybody is probably thinking about. And that is, you've been doing this for a long time. You've had multiple careers, but what advice do you wish you had received before you started out that you've learned along the way that might have made your life a little easier and your career a little bit more successful?
Well, I guess before I started, the advice was work a bit harder at school, but life is the way, life is the way it is. I mean, I think what I have learned, that COVID slowed us all down. Do you know there's a little model called the what's it called? It's the model which talks about high performance, burnout, renewal, and survival. There's a Boston box. So don't know if this will translate in this podcast, but top right is high performance. And we'd like to think that we're there, we can be in high performance, but we can't be in there all the time. Bottom left is burnout. Top left is survival. Bottom right is renewal. This is my point. That what tends to happen is leaders in organizations, and a lot of them, they're in high performance, but where do they go when they're not there? They tend to go to survival modes. So they go high performance, survival, high performance, and then bang, they're down to burnout. Now, I can tell you, as I've been a couple of occasions in my career where I think I've been in this bottom left. And what I've learned is you have to look after yourself. You have to have renewal. I would happily sit at my desk or wherever, from before it was dark, go home when it's dark, and, you're no use to man or beast. So I guess the thing I wish I'd known is you have to look after yourself. You have to take care. You have to get that renewal. Otherwise, it'll affect your health, but it will affect the people around you as well. And have I got a moment? Can I just finish with one little anecdote? So I was working at my headquarters, and I had this view that I needed to be present. And I had a staff officer called Steve. He was a good guy. And one day I said to Steve, why haven't all these people gone home? So you can imagine the top corridor, can't you? Superintendent's chief. Why haven't they all gone home? And he said, boss, they ain't going to go home until you do. I said, well, what do you mean? I mean, but I'm really important. I've got to sit here and stay and do all this really important. They're not going to go until you go. It was that moment that I changed the way that I behaved. And I walked out of the office at a time when I thought, I can't leave at this time. But I thought, no, I got to go, because it gives them permission. And that was quite a salient moment.
Yeah. I mean, leaders, we set the example. So if we're working all the time,
exactly,
everybody else feels they need to do it.
Exactly.
And on this sort of renewal block, it is critical, because you can't look after others if you haven't looked after yourself. And that's, that's a mindset that goes through with me all the time. I have youngish kids. The only way I can help them become the best people they possibly can is if I'm around. And that means making time for them, making time for my family, and looking after my own health so that I'm not gone too early. And if you think about that, right, and think about the people that are reliant on you in your life, it will make you as a leader find more time for that renewal block so that you don't get in the burnout box. You really you never want to be there. It's a hard place to pull yourself out of as well.
Yeah. And it's knowing when it's
focus
also
on the renewal.
And it's knowing when to leave somewhere. That would be the other thing. Sometimes we can spend too long, but kids, they need presence, not presence.
I love that. Perfect. Mike, on that point, we're going to end it off. But we do like to finish with some rapid fire questions. So I have 5 questions for you. Are you ready?
Okay.
Do you prefer audiobooks or paper books?
Paper books.
What is a quality you appreciate in a good friend?
Loyalty.
Do you prefer mountains or the ocean?
Mountains.
What is one piece of technology that you use in your life to make it better?
Spotify.
Love that one. Last question. What would your death row meal be? What would that final meal be if you got to choose it?
Chicken danzak, mushroom rice, Peshwari naan.
Fantastic. Mike, I really appreciate the insight today and the great stories. It's been wonderful to have you on Project Conversations.
Thank you, Zane. Thanks very much indeed.
And with that, we ended another Project Conversations. Thank you for joining us in this journey of learning and inspiration. Today, we've gained insight from our guest and taken another step towards understanding the diverse tapestry of leadership in business and accounting. Remember, each conversation is a step towards the positive transformation of business leaders. We hope our discussion has given you valuable takeaways to apply in your own career and life. Don't forget to subscribe to Project Conversations on YouTube and Spotify so you never miss an episode. We'd also love to hear your thoughts and experiences, so connect with me on social media channels. I'm most active on LinkedIn and would love you to join the conversation. Join us next time for more engaging stories, advice, and conversations that matter. Until then, keep striving for excellence, embracing growth. Thank you for listening, be kind, and goodbye from Project Conversations.